Boom, 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 boom. Okay, let's see here. Okay, see if you can hear me, because my microphone is receiving. There we go. Awesome. Technology is so frustrating, lol. Yeah, I think it's just that I've never had to like restart my streams before, so I'm kind of like unfamiliar with. I know how to like get the streams working, but I'm kind of like unfamiliar how to restart it. Like there isn't like in the stream there isn't like any settings for microphone or webcam, so I wasn't like able to. I wasn't able to check if like my hardware was connected to it. I will probably like next time I like when I did the streams together with Crew of the Fancy. I we used like external software for streaming, so I probably will be doing that in the future, because that is probably more reliable than using directly YouTube. I think Private Potato, if you drop in your question again, I will answer it. You asked something about witchcraft, which seemed very, very interesting. Actually, let's see if I can. Maybe I can access the questions from the old stream. Okay, someone, where's your parrot? It would be very irresponsible for me to have a parrot in my studio apartment. So no parrots, sadly. But I do have magpies, which sometime come and walk on my windowsill, and they're pretty cute. Let's see if I can watch. Yeah, shame if what's his name again? If Proud Potato, if you drop in again, I'll and repost your questions. Also, if you guys had any questions after Proud Potato, you can drop them in again, and we can take a look at them. When is the fridge reveal? I can do a fridge reveal right now if you really want to see what's in my fridge. There's not really a lot of stuff in it. Here you can see. Can you see what's in my fridge? I have some. Here's like the most interesting stuff, which is like alcohol-free cider. I also have a bunch of yogurt here, because I'm a yogurt male, as they call it. Yeah, I don't really have like my fridge is like pretty. It's pretty empty at the moment, because I'm trying to empty it. Fridge contains salt beef. Why would you keep salt beef inside of a fridge? That is maybe that's good, but it seems kind of counterproductive. And piracy yogurt. Yeah, yogurt is good for you. It's good for your gut bacteria. It's also like yogurt is also like very nice in cooking. Like you can use it as a sort of like a supplement for heavy cream, for example. It's a bit healthier. Bottle of rum. No, it's a bottle of cider. I used cider when I was cooking mussels. Mussels is like one of my favorite dishes. It's so good. It prevents scurvy. Yeah, like no one has actually asked this, but like one of my sort of hobbies, one of my main hobbies is cooking. So I do a lot of cooking, and I cannot. I need to like eat my food fresh. I pretty much always cook my own food. Mussels are damn good. Yeah, they're really good. It's a very sustainable protein source as well. Magellan has to take his dogs for a walk. That is very responsible. They shouldn't. You shouldn't let them go to the toilet inside your house. That is kind of a bad idea. Okay, Prime Potato asked his question again. Sea turtles got me off the island. Excellent. Nice to see you again. I was wondering how prevalent witchcraft fears were among pirates. I've never heard about them being especially afraid of witches. There is this like incident, the closest we have, and I mention it pretty much always when I talk about superstitions, but a group of pirates, which Dampier was amongst, when they crossed the Cape of Good Hope, they were discussing it was on Valentine's Day, and they were talking about the women troubles and that sort of stuff. And shortly after arrived a storm, and they said, yeah, we shouldn't have been talking about women and love that caused the storm. So that is like the closest I've come to like finding some sort of like weird superstition. But it probably were like the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. And in a lot of cases, when someone says, even me included, that like I don't know something, it doesn't mean that it isn't documented, or that there isn't some sort of book which talks about it. I just personally haven't encountered it. Caligula asked, "Who is your favorite MILF?" Asking the questions that really matter now. I met a nice MILF on a bus once. She had really nice perfume, but I didn't get her name, sadly. Other than that, I don't know. Like when I think MILF, I think of like Skylar White from Breaking Bad. That is like what comes to mind. And if you even say that you're attracted to Skylar White, then Walter White is gonna send like hitmen to your house, like kind of what happened to what's his name, Ted. David Mello said, "Just make sure you get fresh mussels." Yeah, I always get fresh mussels, like on the ice from the grocery store, like usually I get from like a fish store. I haven't tried canned ones. And like the fresh ones are the ones who are good, like when you like boil them or steam them in wine or cider or whatever. I prefer cider, actually. Liam Hart said, "You think you'll ever get a chance to make your own pirate cookbook?" No, it's like, for one, I don't really like. It's not like something I'm an expert in, so there are definitely like people who are more knowledgeable about it, who have more stuff to contribute. Vargold asked, "How hard was it to get quality iron in the various colonies? Were there any colonies capable of making their own cannons, or did all of those need importing? How expensive would a 6-pounder be versus a 32-pounder?" I'm far from an expert on like the cost of cannons, but metals were definitely a scarcity in the colonies. A lot of ships were actually made with built. A lot of boats were, of course, built with tree nails instead of metal nails, because metal was a scarcity. And I've talked about this quite a lot. Like whenever you would scupper a ship, you would burn it so you could recover the ironwork, because it was precious, even if you were European sailors or whatever, because metalwork, wherever you were, it was quite rare and precious and expensive. And of course, cannons were barely used at all in the colonies on colonial built ships. They might have swivel guns, but usually they only had muskets, and those were usually imported from Europe. And of course, the most popular seafaring vessel in the colonies was, of course, the canoe, which was usually a dugout and not even made with any iron at all, and could even be made without metal tools in the worst case. So quality iron in the colonies, quite rare. I'm not. I think there are cases where pirates stole iron, and I think there were several Spanish colonies which produced iron as well. But and iron sometimes appear as an item of plunder. Virus Yikes asks, how were Guineamen so fast? Was it their hull or rigging? It was a combination. If you look at like pictures of Guineamen, like they usually sort of frigate reminiscent. So they have very low castles, very low like after castle and forecastle, and they seem to be built like to be long, have very low castles, very low like after castle and forecastle, and they seem to be built like to be longer and more slender. And usually Guineamen were of course full rigged. And the full rig or the ship rig is, when you have three masts, primarily with square sails, but you also have usually a triangular mizzen sail. And of course, they added the triangular sails in the triangular foresails in the 1720s, 30s. So yeah, the Guineamen were fast, both owing to hull and rigging. They were of course quite reminiscent of frigates, which is why pirates favor them so much. Just some dude said, "Look, not to brag, but I'm probably the only one here who's in a boat right now." Yeah, I'm not on a boat, sadly, and that's probably for the best for the internet connection. If I was on a boat, the internet connection would probably be garbage. Loxley asked, was Carolina more receptive to pirates than Virginia? And if so, why? Carolinas were settled by Barbadians and Virginia by English cavalier gentry. So that depends on the time period you're discussing. In the 17th century, the Virginia was very receptive towards pirates and accepted them, but it was not as receptive towards pirates as say New York, for example. And of course, a lot of the Puritans were very receptive towards pirates, and a lot of them had established the colonies out of piratical interest. And the Carolinas seem to have developed more of their piratical sympathies, or it appears to have become more prominent during the early 18th century and during the 1710s. Of course, the best example is Blackbeard, who was really able to ingratiate himself with the local Carolina community, and who seems to have been, the Carolinans weren't the ones who got rid of Blackbeard. It was a neighboring state. I don't remember which. It was Spotswood. I think it might have been from Virginia, but it was Spotswood, who was from a neighboring colony. So yeah, in the 17th century, the Virginia was receptive towards pirates, but in the early 18th century, the Carolinians definitely continued. And the Carolinians in the 18th century, they were also one of the more impoverished colonies. So they had less ability to spend. They had less money to spend, which of course meant that they couldn't legally acquire as many of the fun stuff, like sugar and cacao and stuff. So when someone like Blackbeard arrived and sold this stuff on a really steep cut rate, because the stuff was stolen, they were quite receptive towards it. And of course, pirates like Blackbeard was also a great opportunity for the Carolinas to acquire slaves. So yeah, they benefited from piracy quite a lot. But as I said again, it depends on the time period you're discussing. Caligula asked, what is the most historically accurate movie you've ever seen? Um, at the top of my mind, I'm thinking of Master and Commander. That one is quite accurate. Is one of those. It's also a good movie. Um, I don't think I've watched any historical movies in a while. The most historically accurate pirate movie is probably Treasure Island from 1990. 1990, also called The Devil's Treasure. It's a really good. It's probably the best, my favorite pirate movie, because it's also, aside from the historical accuracy, it's just very well made. Really good music, really good dialogue, and everything. I think it's the best Treasure Island adaptation. Aside from that, historically accurate movies. If you're including like series, I think Deadwood. I also watched Deadwood a while back. That is like the Wild West. Because I'm assuming you're not only asking about pirate movies. But yeah, I tend to forget about a lot of stuff I watch. Liam Hart asked, "Does your knowledge of pirate history sour watching pirate media?" I mean, honestly, I barely watch any pirate media. It's like, aside from like researching history and like making videos, I don't really have like much interest in like stuff about pirates. Aside from that, so like I don't really play pirate video games or watch pirate movies and stuff. It's just I like the history. I like the history of pirates, but I don't really care about anything else. Uh, uh, uh. Muppet Treasure Island is not accurate, but still is the best. Yeah, I like Muppet Treasure Island a lot. I watched it a lot as a kid. It was probably one of my favorite kids. Favorite kids. That sounds weird. It was one of my favorite movies when I was growing up as a kid, and I would like come home from school and stuff, or like daycare and watch it. Uh, a lot of good music as well. I think I watched it a few years back actually, and I still like it as an adult. And of course, the what's it called, Professional Pirate. That is like a really good song. But also the intro song and like the intro musical number, like Shiver My Timbers, Shiver My Soul. That one is also quite good. So yeah, that's a good movie. Um, I watched Deadwood for the boobs. You watched it for the plot. We are not the same. I watched it for the canned peaches. Because what's his name? Swedgin. Swedgin! Francisco cocksucker! Swedgin! No, what's it called? Al Swearingen. Yeah, he loves eating canned peaches on his like celebrations. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Do you download all your movies on Pirate Bay? I can no, I acquire all of my media legally. Are you implying that I'm a pirate or something? Toph Beijing asked, "How have you gotten into pirate history, if not from Pirates of the Caribbean movies?" I mean, I watched those when I was a kid and stuff, but I think my interest in pirate history kind of started when I actually read Charles Johnson's general history of the pirates. Um, I see someone in the chat who's a bit tone deaf. That's a bit funny. I mean, if I would admit to committing crimes on stream, that would be the most stupidest thing you could ever do. Uh, but no, I got into pirates probably from well, I read Charles Johnson's General History of the Pirates back in 2018, I think, and that is like how I got into and I kind of realized that there's like a lot of pirate history which people are just not talking about, and I thought that was quite interesting, and then I kind of started from there, and then I started reading more serious stuff, like more books, and then started reading more period documents. But it's kind of like the hard thing about starting when researching history, or well, when starting anything, is like it's hard to find somewhere where to start, and then it's also where to continue. It's always like hard to find like research material and also good research material. And of course, it's something which I still struggle with. It's easier nowadays, and I know how to search for stuff, but there's always stuff which is going to slip through your fingers, and you have to know where to look. Frogman Smith said, not historically accurate, but my favorite is the 1950 Treasure Island or the 1932. I've not seen the 1932 edition. I've seen the 1951. I think that's the one with what's his name, the guy who actually like started the whole pirate accent thing. And I think that one was good as well. It was decent, but yeah, it was good. It was good. And I think I've used a few clips from that movie in a few videos as well. I think like it would be fun to use like more clips from like old pirate movies, like black and white. But the thing is, I don't think the black and white aesthetic like it really fits a pirate channel, because part of the like pirate appeal, it's so much about the the colorful, the tropics and everything. So having black and white footage, it wouldn't really fit compared to if you would make like stuff about World War One or cowboy history or whatever, or like 19th century history. Then it would fit to have like black and white footage. But pirates, I don't really think so. Loxley asked, why did James II issue a proclamation for the more effectual reducing and suppressing of pirates and privateers in America? If I remember correctly, I'm always like a bit fudgy on like remembering all of these like legal all the laws instituted and legal actions. But if I remember correctly, he did it because in order to improve relations with the Spanish, because James II, he if I remember correctly, like he seems to have had Spanish sympathies, but also some anti-Spanish sentiment. Like there is definitely, because he did stuff like he knighted Bartholomew Sharp and pardoned Sharp for after Sharp went on a rampage in the Spanish Pacific, in Peru, South America. Because Sharp gave Charles II some maps of that region, which of course were going to be useful for Charles II and the English government if they went to war with Spain in the future, or if they would, just engage in commercial activity in the region. But yeah, I think the reason why he instituted the proclamation for the suppressing of pirates, it was to improve relations with the Spanish. But it didn't exactly work, because all of the pirates they just went to the French instead, basically. 00 asks, was there any attempt to make a fully iron ship or steel ship before the 1800s? Very interesting question. As far as I know, I've never heard about it. There were experiments with making submarines, but I think those submarines were entirely made from wood. They also made, I talked about this in the video about armor. They made experiments with lead sheeting for the lower hull of ships, but that was in order to protect it against barnacles and stuff. But I've never heard about any experiments of making like metal ships before the 1800s, and I think that was largely because metal ships would have been too heavier for the riggings to handle, basically. Spencer Quinn asked, where do you get most of your research material? Is there any particular university archive you use? Most of my research material, it comes from I have different books, and then I actually tend to grab the sources listed in those books, and then it kind of goes on. But there are also like websites where you can find period documents and research papers. I use my university. I tend to get books from there. I also use Internet Archive. It's a very good source. And I also use JSTOR. JSTOR is also very good for finding academic papers and such. I would recommend JSTOR quite a lot. if you just want to read papers on, especially good for like archaeological papers. You look like you're about to fall down. There we go. Just Some Dude asked, have you read Age of Piracy by Robert Cass? It's an older book, but it looked cool. Sadly, I have not read it. Just Some Dude... Okay, yeah, I already answered your question. The only Kaiser in here is the Protestant Kaiser. That is pretty based. Caligula said, don't mock Mary Read or I will have you fight in the Colosseum against 4 lions. yeah, there are quite a few of those simps. Pride Potato said, I can see why you don't use black and white footage when you explain it like that. Yeah, it's definitely, I try to, of course, I sort of experiment a lot with the what was it called, the aesthetic direction of the channels. The aesthetic direction of the Baltic Empire channel is actually, you might have seen it in the Gnorstava video, but in the video I'm working on at the moment, which is going to be published later this month, I'm using images, a lot of images from the Bayeux tapestry, and I'm actually like cutting out and making sort of animations with it, because I kind of want to, on the Baltic Empire, I kind of want to have this like sort of medieval tapestry aesthetic. So I'm trying to use, and there's also like using images from medieval those illuminated manuscripts. For example, the Radziwill Chronicle, which is one of the Russian chronicles. But yeah, on the currently on Golden Gunpowder, I'm sort of like using going mostly for like 17th century paintings and maps and stuff. And it becomes easier with time, like finding the pictures. Like when I started out, and even just a year ago, I didn't have as many like period images and stuff. And that like finding, I talked about like finding research material. Finding images is arguably harder, especially good images. Someone who has a name in Cyrillic. Sadly, I do not. I'm not familiar enough with Cyrillic to pronounce your name. Is it like Rek, maybe? Have you heard about Jose Reves, also known as Pepe a Majorcan? I have not heard about him. Caligula said JSTOR is based on education pill. Yeah, JSTOR is very good. Yes, you're right. Jack is Jack. Oh my! Oh, I actually got it right. Well, kind of Jack. So, oh yeah. I actually seen you comment on the channel because I see your profile picture. Yeah, that's super cool. Nice to see that you made it. Are you from Russia, or are you Ukrainian, or where are you from? If you don't have to tell me if you don't want to. Caper Peter asked, have you come across any information about pirate priests? Yes, I have. Not a lot that I remember at the top of my mind. John Baptiste Labat, he was a Dominican monk, I think, or a Dominican priest who wrote a travel journal, and he later became an official in the on Saint-Domingue. And he traveled to the Caribbean, and he traveled a lot with pirates and sailed with flybusters. And he wrote about his stay with them. And he was a priest, and he held mass for them. And he spoke about other priests who traveled with the flybusters and held mass with them and stuff like that. Bartholomew Roberts was also interested in acquiring a priest to hold mass aboard his ship, and he asked the priest to come join him, but the priest declined. Those are the mentions of pirate priests which I remember at the top of my mind. There might be more, but yeah, there were pirates who, especially in the early 18th century, in the 1720s, who seemed to have disliked the clergy. But there were, of course, a lot of pirates who were religious, like everyone else during this period. David Melos asked, if you had one weapon of choice on a marooned island, would you take a flintlock pistol or a wheelock pistol? I would probably choose the flintlock because the flintlock is more field expedient, whereas a wheelock, I mean, flintlock is also like they can have issues with them, but the issues are usually more easier to remedy than. And even if you have like some parts of the lock which are sort of malfunctioning, you can still make a flintlock fire. Like if the usually like maybe the half cock doesn't work, you can still make it work. Whereas a wheelock, it's way more intricate and there's way more stuff in a wheelock which can break, and then suddenly you cannot fire it. Then again, I don't really see why if I'm on a marooned island, I probably wouldn't have much of a choice. But yeah, there's a reason why the pirates and the buccaneers and colonials in general adapted the flintlock so early. Basically, they adapted the flintlock on a wide scale, pretty much in the 1640s, 1630s even. 1630s, I think, is the earliest mentions when flintlocks start appearing in the Caribbean colonies, which is like just like 10 years after the flintlock as we know it was basically invented, as it seems. Monkster said, learning about manuscript making is a wild rabbit hole. Countless people are employed by an entire industry just to make the colors for manuscripts. Yeah, and like books in general during the medieval period were very expensive. Divina Ducksworth said, speaking of illuminated manuscripts, I've been meaning to try Joss Sawyer's game Pentiment, based on Renaissance Germany. Isn't it actually set earlier? Or maybe it is like Renaissance Germany. Depends, of course, how you define the Renaissance. Yeah, I think Joshua Sawyer, he has appeared, or he has studied Holy Roman history, actually, of the Holy Roman history of the Holy Roman Empire. So he's quite invested in this. He also used like a lot of his historical knowledge when writing or designing New Vegas, Fallout New Vegas. Tyler Rodriguez said, is there any pirate you aggressively don't want to ever cover for a reason or another? No, I think that's kind of like... no, I think that's kind of like an attitude. Like, I don't have a sort of like attitude. That doesn't really sound like something that could explain my attitude towards history. I think like all history deserves to be told and shared, and I think all history should be appreciated. And I don't think like any historical figure should be like talked down to or demeaned in some sort of way. Like, of course, I think it's more interesting to talk about stuff which is less known, so you can introduce more people to lesser known topics. But ultimately, I make my videos about the sort of pirates which I think are popular to a certain degree. But those are at least the ones I try to prioritize, because it's the stuff which get views more often than not. Jack said, "I'm from Russia." Yeah, cool, cool. Which city are you from in Russia, or like region, if you wanna share? Would be funny if you're like from the depths of Siberia or something. I like Lake Baikal. Not entirely sure how you pronounce it. That seems like a very, very nice place. Monkster said, this question is more speculation based, but do you think any Red Sea men met with / joined Maroon companies? Seager is theorized to have been from Every's company, but it's mostly conjecture. Yeah, I was about to say Seager as well. That is probably the ones which historians guess on mostly. Aside from him, most of the the thing is like the average lifespan of someone on Madagascar was pretty short. It's like, and I kind of joke about this in the videos, like you step your foot on Madagascar and you die. So a lot of them had retired or were dead. There were only like a few of them remaining. and even like after the Marooners who settled down on Madagascar, most of them died or fled pretty quickly. So I think there might have been a few, one or two, but I don't think it would have been a significant amount. Caper Peter said, "Yes, I read about Abbot Labat, but he wrote in French." No, his you can actually find his journal in. I have his journal translated to English. I think you should be able to acquire it on Amazon. I'm opening up my Kindle at the moment, so I can see what the book is named specifically, and then maybe you can look it up on Amazon. But yeah, it exists. There is a translation in English. So I'm opening it. I am in my Kindle at the moment. Let's see if we can see what it's called. It also has like a white. Oh yeah, it's called the Memoirs of Père Labat. So it's kind of like a weird name. Let's see if I can paste in the title. Okay, so my translated edition is called. I'm gonna paste it in shortly. I have to kind of edit it a bit. Okay, so look up that title on Amazon, and you should hopefully be able to find it. Virus Yike said, "If you had to choose, would you rather sail on a normal brig from Black Flag or the Jackdaw?" I barely remember like any of those ships, to be honest. I like the concept art of the Jackdaw, like when she was designed more realistically, and also she was initially designed to be a sloop, and that looked really good. And Caper Peter said, "Thank you. I did know there was an English translation. I live in Russia, and Amazon doesn't work here. I'm sad to hear." Yeah, I don't know how you can acquire it in that case. I wish. Yeah, I don't know how you could acquire it. Like maybe there should be like some site or something where you could acquire it. I know that you Russians have you're quite keen of not to be stereotypical or anything, but I know a lot of Russians use alternative means of acquiring Western media. So maybe there's some way for you to find it. There actually seems to be a lot of like pirate enthusiasts in Russia and Ukraine. I don't know about Belarus. I know there are actually quite a lot of pirate video games which are designed in Russia and Ukraine, and a lot of them seem to be good as well. But I don't think I've tried any of them. Oh yeah, and you also talk about the Ushkuynix. I think that's how I pronounce it. My Russian isn't the best. I think I talked about them earlier when I talked about Russian pirates in the Baltic during the Middle Ages. Loxley asked, "What is your favorite first-hand period account of pirates?" Mine is Henry Pittman. Yeah, Pittman's account is very good. It is really a treasure trove because he talks so much about he talks so much about the average life of pirates, and just when he is on Providence, for example, he talks about the fruits and the spices and the medicine they have there, and he talks about this incident where they out of desperation load their muskets and blunderbusses with glass and stuff. It's really good. Other than that, I've talked about Labat. Labat is quite good. About Paris specifically. Yeah, I have trouble. I always have trouble remembering stuff like this at the top of my head. So I'm trying to think of something unique which I haven't talked about today, which is difficult because also my mind is like always all over the place. I always tend to default back on, if you include like journals. I of course like Bartholomew Sharp's journal because he wrote it in such like a personalized manner. And he definitely has he definitely puts a lot of attitude on display in his in his in his journal. Maybe I can remember more stuff for you. I also think there is, of course, to mention one account which we haven't talked about today yet, is the account of Alonso Ramirez, who was a Puerto Rican carpenter who found himself kidnapped by buccaneers, and one of those buccaneers was actually William Dampier. And what's so interesting about Ramirez's account is that he provides an alternate perspective of Dampier's travels. And of course, he talks about a lot of the stuff which Dampier left out, a lot of the more gruesome stuff, like the torture sessions and how the slaves and forced men were treated. So Ramirez is, because he was an opponent of pirates, he definitely provides a really valuable perspective. And there is also a very, very good annotated version of his account, it's basically a book which also contains it talks a lot about the colonies and the context surrounding the publishing of Ramirez's account, because there was, for a long while, Ramirez's account was, people said it was fictional, but some historians, including this one, I forgot his name sadly, but I've cited him in some videos. He was able to trace like, yeah, this is stuff which actually happened. Of course, a lot of stuff in it seems to be hyperbole. Like he talks about the pirates like having lovers and having sex with them and then like killing them. Stuff which seems so extreme and just ridiculous. But there's a lot of stuff in there which definitely seems like it probably happened. But all of these accounts, whether it was written by pirates or an outsider or someone else, you have to take it with a pinch of salt. You have to take all period accounts and sources with a pinch of salt, which kind of goes with the field. Like, and you kind of need to relax a bit as well and say like, yeah, this is what they said happened. And you don't, at the same time, you don't need to, when describing these accounts and stuff, you don't need to talk about all the time that like, yeah, we need to take it with a pinch of salt. You kind of need to take that for granted. Like, this is what we have available. And maybe it's not true, maybe it is true. It doesn't really matter. It's a story, all of history is basically a story which we conjure up from the information we have available. So yeah, you should kind of like have a sort of relaxed attitude towards it, I think, and see it as inspiration and entertainment and stuff like that. Just some dude said, you should live stream Sid Meier's Pirates. It would be fun to have in the background while answering stuff. Yeah, I've thought about it, doing that, and maybe I'll do something like that in the future. It probably wouldn't be too hard, but I would require some external software, and I know which one to use to do it. Then again, I might not be able to focus so much on the questions. Now it's a bit calm, actually. There's not too many questions, but sometimes on the previous streams there have been a lot of questions. But yeah, maybe I'll do. But I like, of course, to focus on the chat and answering what you guys have. Captain Gunstar asked, how do you feel about modern piracy and the sort of resurgence in the practice today? I think it definitely seems to be a sort of logical consequence of the modern geopolitical and geographical situations. It's I talked about it a bit at the end of the Red Seamen video, I think, about the resurgence of piracy in the Red Sea. And you can definitely draw a lot of parallels, like the Houthis being financed. They are, of course, religiously motivated. They're also politically motivated against Israel. They, of course, operate in the same area as the Red Seamen in this. So you have like this geographical determinism. And they, of course, also, like the Red Seamen and the buccaneers of the period, they are funded for political reasons by a government. They are funded by Iran. And of course, it's really nothing new. You know, all of the superpowers in the world. I think I don't know if China does it. At least I haven't heard about it. But you know, the U.S. and Russia and all of those superpowers seem to fund paramilitary groups, which is basically what the Buccaneers and the Red Seamen and the pirates, the Marooners were. They were paramilitary groups. Of course, what differs the Marooners from the Buccaneers and those were that they were independent. They weren't financed. Um, Caper Peter said, I tried to make orders to the US and UK through options that bypass sanctions, but the post office accidentally lost my packages with books. But I'll think of something. Yeah, I've ordered a few books from the US and I've had troubles with receiving them as well. I've received a few of them, but there are also some uh, which I sadly have not received yet, and maybe they're lost or maybe it's gone. Maybe pirates stole them. Who knows? Um, but yeah, it's a really sad situation. What's going on, you know, with the with the sort of conflicts, and you know, um, these conflicts too. You know, it's to some degree, you know, there are so many reasons that lead up to these conflicts. To a certain degree, you know, they are inevitable, but at the same time, you know, it's a shame, and it's a shame when like people. I mean, people like you know, have like these sort of everyday struggles, you know, and for reasons which are kind of like um, beyond us as you know, average people. You know, we can't really affect these geopolitical situations, and yet they affect us in of course major ways, but also in these minor ways. By the way, surprisingly, but I actually know many people personally in Russia who watch you. You are popular here. Okay, that's cool. And I know there's a lot of like people in, of course, who a lot of Russians who watch Baltic Empire. They actually make up like the second largest demographic of recent viewers on Baltic Empire. But Baltic Empire has a very like diverse audience, um, whereas Golden Gunpowder is primarily the English-speaking world. So it's like around half American, and then a sort of split splash of the Anglosphere. So UK, Australia, Canada, South Africa is also actually quite large, which is very interesting. Mikkel Suskard Nielsen asked, "Do you know how widespread voodoo men / bokors were?" I've heard much. I've heard they have been used, but I don't know much about it. That is a very interesting question. William Dampier, he wrote in his book that he was essentially he got a worm, a parasite in his foot, and he spoke about essentially contacting a witch doctor and being healed by a witch doctor. And I think this witch doctor lived in. Now my head is falling down again. I think this witch doctor lived somewhere in the 13 colonies around Virginia or those parts. That is the one account I remember specifically of voodoo. But that was quite interesting. This is definitely something I would like to research more and make some sort of video about, because I think the sort of like magic or these like superstitions in the region are definitely quite interesting, and also the Native American sort of superstitions and magic are very interesting. And Lionel Wafer wrote quite extensively about it. I actually have a video short about voodoo and magic, so it's less than a minute long, but I think it's still quite interesting. Dampier, he always shows up. Yeah, he literally always does. Tyler asked, does it ever amuse you that Henry Morgan died of rum consumption leading to liver failure, and yet Captain Morgan's rum slogan is "Drink like the captain"? Yeah, well, I guess if you drink like the captain, like he did, you're definitely going to provide him with a lot of doubloons. Yeah, there's definitely an amusing sense of irony to the Captain Morgan's rum brand and the fate of Admiral Sir Henry Morgan. He's not even a captain. I mean, they say the captain. So, and their Captain Morgan is a separate character, I think, inspired by Henry Morgan. Sorry, I had to take a quick grog break. David Melos asked, "What is your nationality?" I'm Swedish. Virus Yikes asked, "Yo, what's your opinion on the Russian ship Standard?" I have not heard about it, actually. Caligula said Virgin Golden Gunpowder versus Chad Baltic Empire. Yeah, they are like two opposite personalities competing for attention in my head constantly. Only a steady dose of rum keeps the voices silent. Captain Gunstar said, "I haven't had a chance to study antiquity age piracy. If I were to start studying it, what recommendations would you have on where to begin?" Sadly, this is a field where I know next to nothing. Well, I basically know nothing. I know that there were, I know that Julius Caesar was kidnapped by pirates and that they were quite powerful. I know about the Sea Peoples, but I only have like shallow knowledge of these groups. And antiquity is a very, very long period. I would probably like just Google books on antiquity. You could also try to ask ChatGPT. I actually tend to use ChatGPT quite a lot for like trying to find books. But the funny thing about ChatGPT is like a lot of the times I ask like, "Hey, do you have any books about this?" And it just makes stuff up. It just generates like random stuff which doesn't exist. But sometimes it has recommended like good books to me sometimes. Other times it recommends stuff which is popular, but maybe not the deepest of stuff. So yeah, I would recommend Googling. Also try something like JSTOR, like searching ancient piracy or piracy in antiquity. And also also asking like ChatGPT, and then of course Googling the books recommended by ChatGPT, because it might generate random stuff. Yeah, I'm sorry. Sadly, I wasn't able to, but I hope that was a sufficient answer for you. Devil made some damn clean English. Many Swedes have a pretty thick accent. Yeah, of course. I mean, I also study linguistics at the university, so I have like pretty good teachers in English. And people also ask why I suddenly speak in a more like British RP. And partly it is because like a lot of my teachers are English, but also because I actually find it more easier to speak in RP than in American general American. I mean, I can sort of speak in a more American accent, but it is more difficult, especially when trying to read a video script. Because like the thing with like when you're speaking with general American is that I prefer general American over received pronunciation, but you have to pronounce basically every letter in the word, whereas in received pronunciation you can kind of, they drop a lot of the letters like arse and whatever. And English has a lot more sounds than Swedish does. Swedish is actually a very basic language. It's a very flexible language. Like you can basically make up new words on the spot, because we basically just make conjunction words where we take two words and then slap them together, and bam, it's a new word. But Swedish has much less sounds than English does. So we don't have dental fricatives anymore, like in that. We don't have those sounds. We don't have as many voiced sounds. We also don't have we also don't have the ch sound like in chill. So we just say like we were in the if I would speak in a Swedish accent, I would say chill. That because we don't have a lot of the English sounds. So yeah, received pronunciation is easier for me than general American. Loxley asked, will you do a video on Sephardic Jewish pirates? The Sephardic Jewish pirates weren't really, there weren't a lot of them in the Caribbean during the time period which I cover. They were basically only relegated to being merchants on Jamaica who sort of managed the illegal trade between the English pirates and the Spanish colonies, the sort of contraband smuggling trade. A lot of them were also investors in pirate ships and privateer ships. I think one of Henry Jennings was one of the leaders of the Nassau Flying Gang Marooners. One of the investors in his sloop, the Bathsheba, seems to have been a Jewish merchant on Jamaica. But there weren't I don't think there were any Jewish Sephardic pirate captains during the Golden Age, which I primarily cover. There were, of course, quite a few Sephardic Jewish pirates in the 16th century. In the Mediterranean, and they joined up with the they joined up with the Barbary Corsairs. Michael Robert Embry asked, would you do some research / video on British pirate author Cat? There is a town in the Bahamas named after him, Arthur Town, and the Bahamas named an island after him, Cat Island. Yeah, I've heard about Cat Island. I didn't know it was named after a pirate. I've never heard about him. It sounds very interesting. Maybe I'll look him up after the stream. I'll actually Google it right now, so I'll remember it. Arthur. I presume it's Arthur Cat. Cat Island. Established. Yeah, sounds very interesting. I'll look it up later. Try using Swiss Cow's search engine instead of Google. Yeah, I tend to use DuckDuckGo, but sometimes Google just gives better search results than DuckDuckGo, especially for images. DuckDuckGo is quite bad at images. But yeah, maybe I'll try the search engine instead. Worldwide Ghosts channel said, ahoy. Hello. Good evening. Good day. I don't know where you are. Hope you're doing fine. Caligula asked, do you listen to Bladey? Never heard about it. Tyler Rodriguez said, what's the most generic pirate name? John. Like pretty much literally every pirate is named like John. So many John. John Reed. Yeah, John Reed is a very basic. I would say like John as a surname. John Smith, honestly. Smith was also a common name in this period. I can't think of any like name which was. There are some incidents though when you have like these pirates who have like just different people who have like these same names, and it becomes really silly and people conflate them. And I talked about one of them in the Madagascar video. Heitor Fontanella said, bonjour, moi amigo. Okay, so I think you're talking in Portuguese, so I cannot read it exactly. I'm not exactly sure what you're saying. I know a bit of Spanish, but I know no Portuguese. Are you asking me if I will make videos in Portuguese? I think they are automatically because I know some have requested that I have Portuguese subtitles, but I think you can actually make automatic subtitles for it as well. Sonja White said, you are not typically Swedish looking. Actually, if you look up like there are I vaguely look at the moment like well, what's his name again? I think Charles X. if you look him up. Except he did weigh a bit more than me. Yeah, he basically looks like me. But if I don't look Swedish, what do you think I look like instead? But I mean, of course, like I'm not like fully Swedish. I'm only I'm at least half Swedish. My mother is from. I talked about this earlier. My mother is from Latvia, and I have like so I have Latvian, Ukrainian, Polish ancestry partly as well. Caligula asked thoughts on Ben Shapiro's sister. Awooga! Virus Yikes asked, Yo, Gunpowder, would you rather have $100 for every pirate you know, or $1,000 for every named pirate ship you know? Can I pick both? 00 asked, was there a royal/noble or someone in high society that had been kidnapped or taken prisoner and turned into a pirate and kept being one in history? That sounds like a good story, but I think that's all it is. If I remember correctly, Diego de Mulato did kidnap a Spanish noblewoman, but I think he released her. And also the Pacific pirates, so Bartholomew Sharp and his crew, his crooks, they also captured a Spanish noblewoman at some point. And there were, of course, I don't know if there were any. Of course, there were a lot of like aristocrats who primarily engaged in privateering, but buccaneering as well. I'm trying to. This is the problem with me. I often require like very long pauses so I can think of a good answer. I don't know exactly about any nobles who were kidnapped and turned to piracy, but there were definitely a lot of. It doesn't sound impossible because, of course, there were people who were kidnapped and became pirates, and there were noblemen who became pirates and buccaneers and privateers, especially. I'm the pirate named John on the ship Revenge. Yeah, it's like the most basic. Some people in the Discord server have actually found some really funny pirate names. I think like the Coconut. That's probably my favorite pirate ship name. The Coconut. That should be Dampier's ship. Frogman asked, "Hey, who made your clothes?" I bought it from a Swedish site called Urda. So it's in English. It should be pronounced Urda. It's written like this, and I bought them online. And I actually have this. So I can show this. Like I have this like this bag. I don't know if you can. I think you can see it. Yeah, this one I bought it from a. When I was on Gotland on the medieval market, I bought it from a Swedish woman who lives in America these days. She made it herself. Very nice woman. Heitor, okay, so Matt McLean translated. Matt, do you actually know? Do you know Portuguese, or did you use Google Translate? Who were the greatest Portuguese pirates of all? Do you know? There were, of course, a lot of like. I mean, it also depends on how you define pirates, because there were a lot of like basically Portuguese conquistadors in the early 1500s who carved out the Portuguese colonial empire in Africa, India, and Asia. Some people want to call them pirates. Depends on your definition. Other than that, at the top of my mind, I think of I was thinking about Bartholomew. I think it was called Bartholomew Portuguese, and I think it was actually, and there were actually quite a few Portuguese pirates active on Jamaica. Actually, I think in the mid 17th century, but nothing which I'm an expert on. Sandra White says, "Guy looks Spanish." Ay, caramba. No, yo hablo poquito español. Muy poquito. No, my Spanish is completely atrocious. I barely wanna speak. I barely want to speak Spanish. It's a bit embarrassing. But I learned a bit. I studied like Spanish for a very short while, and then I went to Peru last year, and I picked up some Spanish there, so I can hold like a super basic conversation. But also, like when I talk, often when I talk in Spanish, uh, it's usually like a garbled mix of like Spanish, German, and a bit of French. That was actually really funny. I met like me and my travel buddy. We met a French woman who gave us coffee in Peru, and I barely the French I know. I like know a few words from studying pirates, and I basically combine it a bit with like Spanish, and that's basically how I can maybe form one or two sentences in French, and often it's the case with Spanish. But I like Spanish a lot, and there's like a lot of languages I want to learn, but it takes time. But apparently, I look Spanish. And I think someone else said I look Irish. Someone said I look like Jesus. Okay, yeah, I guess this is what happens when you're genetically a cocktail between of like half of Europe's nationalities. You just kind of look like all of them. Then again, I don't really think there's like a huge difference between like the different European peoples. Ich comprende nicht, lol. Oh ja, ich spreche kleine Deutsch as well. Aber mein Deutsch sind nicht so gut. Caligula asked, "What is the greatest nation in the world, and why is it Italy?" But actually, have you ever been to Italy? Will you ever visit anywhere in the Americas? I haven't been to Italy. It would be fun to visit. It's not a country I'm particularly interested in visiting. Um, there's not a lot I would like to see there. I'm not particularly interested in the cuisine. Of course, I wouldn't if I would get like a vacation to Italy, or if someone would give me a trip, I would visit it, of course. I no hate against Italians, but um, there are definitely places I would. And there's a lot of tourism in Italy as well, right? Like Venice, which so much people there, and stuff. Um, the greatest nation in the world, definitely has to be the Virgin Isles. It's probably where you're from, Cal. No, I'm just kidding. You're from the African country of Shad. Google account asks, could you explain why so many pirates were Jacobites during the golden age of piracy? That is kind of a chicken or the egg sort of question. Like, was it Jacobitism that caused piracy, or was it piracy that attracted Jacobites? And I think it's definitely kind of a lot. I think this could also sort of delve into the sort of psychological realm where you question, are people who are sort of more paramilitary minded and more adventurous, are they more attracted to these sort of fringe or unacceptable political views? Or maybe it is that they had these sympathies from the beginning, and that sort of is what drew them into these fringe societies like pirates. And of course, that is one of the popular answers is that the Stuart dynasty were huge supporters of piracy. Like Charles II, even though, like someone said, he suppressed piracy, he also pardoned a lot of pirates. He also funded privateers a lot. James I, who was exiled, handed out a lot of letters of marque, and privateering commissions to against the Orange government. And also, of course, what's her name again? Queen Anne Stuart. She was also a huge proponent of the privateers during the War of Spanish Succession, and most of the Nassau pirates, the Marooners, were of course privateers during the War of Spanish Succession and had served under Queen Anne. And a lot of them had also been Richard Taylor. He actually talked about having been he lost his position in the Royal Navy during the change in government from Anne to the Hanoverian dynasty. So there seems to have been a lot of reasons there, but I think there's the most obvious reason would be the Stuart had supported privateering, basically, and the Marooners pirates, Jacobite pirates, just saw themselves as privateers. Ich comprends nicht. That's ach so. Vargold says, probably more of a Baltic Empire thing, but will you ever make a video on colonial attempts by nations other than the big three? I recall Poland trying a few colonies, so maybe other nations tried too. That is not exactly a plan I have in mind. I have no plans at the moment of doing any colonial stuff on Baltic Empire. Caligula said, you look like Jacksepticeye. I know he's a YouTuber, but I don't know anything about him. Frogman said, I'm Irish, and you look like a stoner version of Jesus. All right, then. Irish Cream said, Boston is the best, let's all agree. Never been to Boston. Divina Duckworth said, yes, the major cities in Italy are used to be visited by many tourists. The pandemic affected them seriously, though. Yeah, I should have visited Italy during the pandemic. A lot of people here say they like Ireland. I'm going to be living in England actually during the latter half of the year. So maybe I will visit Ireland if I have the opportunity. Captain Gunstar said, if you were going to be a pirate in the Golden Age, what would be the ideal nationality to be under, in your opinion? I mean, there are not a lot of options. You have like basically the English and the French, and that depends on the time period as well. I would probably say the English. Well, that's a complicated question. For the most part, I would probably say English purely because I actually speak English, so it would probably be easier for me to join. Frickin' Chicken said, I've really been enjoying your channel. Good work. Happy I could catch a live stream. I'm glad you've been enjoying it, and welcome to the live stream. If you have any questions, you can just ask them, and I'll try to answer. Sonja White, okay, well, let's see. Sonja White, in this age and in the pirate age, there were no nationalities. That isn't exactly correct. There were definitely people who identified by nationality to some degree during the pirate age, and you can see that. But it is more complicated. But there's definitely cases of people who prefer to group themselves based on their origins. So English pirates, for example, definitely preferred to have homogeneous English crews, and French pirates prefer to have homogeneous French crews. And people, of course, identified each other by nationality. They didn't identify each other like by, those are the guys who serve King Louis or whatever. They said, oh yeah, they're French, they're Spanish or whatever. But of course, the nations during this period, they were conglomerate countries, which means they weren't nation states in the sense that they were made up of only one nationality. They were made up of many nationalities who swore allegiance to a monarch. So I mean, England is the best example. The King of England was also the King of Scotland and Ireland and Wales, or the Grand Prince of Wales, or whatever it's called. And a lot of people in documents, when they speak about Englishmen, that also includes Scotsmen, Welshmen, Cornishmen, and Irishmen. And people like the French, for example, often couldn't distinguish between Scotsmen and Englishmen. They called all of them, the English booger. You know, um, and the same with like Englishmen. They couldn't distinguish between different French, like Breton, Normans, Gascons, Armagnacs, Parisians. They were all the same French, but there wasn't really a unified French language until the early 20th century, the 1920s and 1930s. And same with like pretty much every country. Every country was a huge conglomerate of these different nationalities. So there were definitely national identities and cultural identities and linguistic identities, but it is complicated, definitely. And that's not even touching on the subject of religion and religious identities and the importance of that. Of course, I also think certain countries definitely had more of a sort of defined national identity and were more nationalist. I think the Dutch is probably the best example, because of course the Dutch were quite homogeneous, and they were quite small and quite centralized, I guess you could say. Rob Zone Fire, sorry, I can't see your question before, but I saw it. I'll read it now. What's your opinion on the Barbery Wars? Which, do you mean all of them or one of them? One of them in particular, because there were multiple conflicts against the Barbary pirates in the 17th century, when France, England, and the Netherlands went and bombarded the Algerian coast at several points. And then, of course, the Barbary Wars, when the US and Sweden went in the early 19th century. I guess they're cool enough. Also, Irish Cream did a $5 super chat. Here's my booty. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the super chat. I'll give you a little heart. Absolute Degenerates Inc. said, the UK is fun, a fair amount of naval history museums in our port town cities. Yeah, I look forward to it quite a lot. Definitely going to visit. I might do some videos about it as well. There are actually some special videos I've planned. I also plan on doing a lot of research for Baltic Empire. A lot of like interesting Viking history, of course, in England, and Anglo-Saxon as well, and ancient stuff as well. So I'll see what I can get together. Someone also asked me where in England I'm going to be. You'll have to find me. You'll have to find me. It's going to be a treasure hunt. Find golden gunpowder. Oh yeah, Loxley asked what part of England. Yeah, I missed. There we go. Google account asked, what do you think are some of the main reasons that the golden age of piracy died out in the late 1720s? So there are quite a lot of reasons, and I would primarily recommend you watch my video, which I made really about this topic. It's called, let's see what it's called. I'm looking in my video list at the moment. It's called How Piracy Was Defeated. There were a lot of reasons. For one, I think the most interesting argument is largely that the pirates of this period were largely confused, because they thought that they essentially thought they were going to be able to get away with continuing privateering. Like, yeah, we can steal from people and then we can just get a pardon, and we can sell our plunder and we can sell slaves that we stole, and no one is going to care, because this is what privateers and pirates have been doing for decades. The thing was that things had changed and they weren't able to do that, and they found it rather quickly, which is why so many of them accepted a pardon, the royal pardon in 1718, and only a few of them continued piracy. And a lot of them also accepted the pardon. The new Red Seamen, those who went to Madagascar, they of course accepted the pardons after they had acquired their money in the around 1722, around those years. like Condent and Taylor and those pirates. So I think like the main reason was simply that society didn't accept pirates as much as they did in the previous century. That is like the number one biggest reason. Absolute Degenerates Inc. I mean, the average modern day Anglo speaker cannot distinguish between Portuguese and Spanish. Understandable. At the same time, I think Portuguese and Spanish are very distinct. I think Portuguese is very interesting. It's a very interesting language, just because it sounds so different from Spanish. Rietas B. Murunen asked, "What is the best color of red seamen?" Of seamen. Yeah, so sailors in this period, they were usually quite sunburned, so they would usually have like sort of like tanned sort of brownish skin, sort of mahogany color, and that way you could tell that they were quite seasoned. Caligula asked, "What is the next Baltic Empire video we can expect?" It's going to be about portages, which is the act of transporting a vessel from one body of water to the next over a landmass. And it's coming out on the 14th, so in 2 weeks. Well, 13 days, so 1 day less than 2 weeks. It's going to have an advertisement in it again. Caligula, I hope you watch the ads as well, because I think the ads on Baltic Empire, even if they are actually serious ads, I think they're quite fun. Because the firm I work with, who give me sponsorships, they actually give me quite a lot of leeway with the sort of stuff I throw into the ads, so I can have a lot of these like sort of edgier memes, which is a lot of fun. Because I think like a lot of the sort of sponsorships, why I've been so like reluctant on having sponsorships, is because you have to, like, they want you to read a script and say like, "Oh yeah, I recommend this product, it's so good, you should buy it, and it's like it's ridiculous. And so I guess my kind of like demand, if I make a sponsorship, is like, yeah, I can tell people to buy a product, but I want to make it fun. I want to make it entertaining, so people, if they don't care about the product or whatever, they can at least enjoy, have some fun. And I think that's also like that's the best way to make something appealing to people. That is to make it funny, to make people laugh. And it's also like a way for me to retain the audience, because a lot of people, of course, if you have a sponsorship, if you have an ad, that's going to mean a lot of people are going to click away. And of course, I want to retain people's. So it's kind of a risk. Like when you take a sponsorship, do I risk losing a large amount of the audience, or do I take the security of accepting this rather substantial payment? Because oftentimes the sponsorships are basically able to pay more than the ad revenue from videos. But of course, ad revenue on a video is more long term. You don't know if like a video is going to explode in like 2 years, 10 years, and then suddenly you get rich from it, and that has happened basically on a few of my videos. Double Zero asked, "Is it true that the rest of Europe see the British as the Americans over by you?" No, a lot of people, most Swedes in my country, we like the British, we like the English. You people seem nice, charismatic, funny, very friendly, receptive also. I mean, I don't really have any negative impression of any European people. And also, like, I like Americans as well. I think Americans are super nice. And I've, of course, met very nice Americans online. I've met very nice Americans when I've traveled. I've had nice American teachers, So, and same with Brits, I've met nice Brits. But yeah, there are definitely a lot of people who have, I know outside of Sweden, who have sort of negative perceptions, but a lot of it is also like memes. People just like to joke, say like British people are like bean eaters or whatever. I love beans, by the way. Beans are delicious, and people should eat more beans. It's also a nice source of protein, I guess. Hazel Dormouse said, "We have a privateer in our family who sailed with Sir Francis Drake. He was captain of the ship the Golden Lion." That sounds very cool. Thank you for sharing. Sussex is the greatest county. I'm sure that's a very unbiased opinion. Maybe I'll visit. Isn't Sussex the one who has the coat of arms with the white background with the black crows, or am I thinking of someone else? Pancakes asked if you had to pick a median number for the number of men in rover crews during the 1690s and then during the 1710s, what would it be? So the sort of average pirate crew was usually around between 60 to 100 men. That is like the average crew in this period. Sandra White said, "Well, we are being blamed for all the ills of the world right now." Well, yeah, people always need a scapegoat. It's always like someone who's to blame for everything. It's the Chinese, it's the Americans, it's the British, it's the Jews, it's the Russians, it's the Hibernian conspiracy. It's the Eskimos, the Inuits or whatever. It's the Catholics. I think it's all of them. All of them are too. All of them are responsible except for me. Everyone but me is responsible for the ills of the world. Davina Duckworth said, "Nationality must have been more fluid in an era where so many people were illiterate. It would have been a huge advantage to be literate and multilingual." Yeah, that is definitely a good argument, and you can definitely see like nationalities as we understand them really starts to take place in the 19th century when and the 20th century, of course, when when you started to have public schooling, people became more literate, and you also have more effective transportation like railways, and motor cars, which really connect countries more and allow people to connect more and form more coherent identities, national identities. Whereas previously people mostly stuck to their local village. There were definitely more like local dialects and languages and stronger dialects and languages during the old times. Even looking at something like Wales, like Wales, the Welsh had, of course, the Welsh language exists still today, and the Welsh language is actually performing quite well, and it actually seems to be rising quite a lot now in the 20th century, or 21st century, whereas it wasn't in decline in the 19th and 20th centuries. And before, of course, it was almost separate from English in a lot of cases, unless if you wanted to get into government positions in Wales, then you had to learn English, basically. But a lot of like Welsh pirates, of course, and Welsh sailors and stuff, they spoke both English and Welsh, like Bartholomew Roberts, who was described as speaking in Welsh with other Welshmen. And numeraire 2, mathematics engineering. Of course, one thing Davina is also like Davina. A lot of people also, like educated people, usually spoke Latin. So Latin was kind of like the English. It's like if you knew Latin, then you could communicate with other people who knew Latin from like France, and you could also learn other Latin languages more easier, like the whatever they're called, French, Spanish, Italian. So you have people like Basil Ringrose, who sailed with Dampier and Sharp and those guys, and he knew Latin because he was educated, and he also became a Spanish interpreter. CB asked, "I want to make a career move. Any advice on how to become a pirate? Convert to Islam." I'm gonna take a quick sip here. Caligula asked, "Blonde or brunette?" Are you asking my hair color, or are you asking which one I prefer? Because if you're asking my preference in like women's hair color, I don't have a preference. I think it's ultimately it's the personality that matters. And I think both are nice. It can depends. It mostly, it's like I think everyone has like a certain set of looks which like they sort of adapt to, and everything can look good, and everything can look bad on this, and if that answer sort of makes sense. And it's always like a lot of people, some people, they can really like own their looks. They can really like become like sort of define their looks. The answer is blonde. There are so many like different blonde colors as well. I'm trying to think which hair color I think is like the coolest. Of course, I think white hair color is definitely the coolest, and it's like that should be the life goal of any man to have white hair by the age of 50. Definitely looks respectable. Um Sonja White said, "Most of us are born innocent, but you never met my youngest son." I mean, how old is he? Caligula said, "What is the worst country in the world, and why is it China?" The worst country in the world is where you are from. I'm just kidding. I'm a public person, so I can't go around saying which country is the worst, because I'm going to piss people off, and they're gonna unsubscribe and gonna lose me money, or they're gonna report me, or they're gonna send me gunpowder explosives in the mail. Black powder explosives. I actually worked recently with a girl from China. She was strange. Um, I know actually quite a few people from Taiwan. Um, very very nice people from Taiwan. I mean, Caligula, have you even been to China? You should go to China and get a white monkey job. I think you would make a great fit. Loxley said, "Romanticism helped form national identities. Walter Scott's books bridged the gap between lowlander and highlander that had existed in Scotland beforehand." Yeah, that's an interesting point as well. Um, Google account says, "Have you ever read Ed Fox's work? If you have, what do you think of it?" Yeah, I've read quite a few of his books. I have read, his paper on pirate society is quite good. I think that's his like master thesis. I read, of course, his book on the pirate flags is quite short. I've read, the Pirates in Their Own Words, which is really a compilation with some annotations that he made, which is a really good contribution. And I also read recently, for the Henry Every video, I read the Pirate King. And I think that is like, by the moment I read it, that was like the single best resource on Henry Every. Recently, of course, someone published, I think it was Evan King, I think it's called. He actually emailed me recently, um, published a book about Henry Every and like a theory about Henry Every retiring as a spy, actually. Um, and that is like a recent book, and recent books tend to include more recent research. So that might be a good source on Henry Every. But yeah, Ed Fox is definitely one of the best pirate historians which we have available to read from. Goofy Goober, Goofy Goober. God, I cannot sing that song. Like I've tried so many times. Goofy Goober. Bang, 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 bang. Yeah, it's so difficult. Such a tongue twister. Goofy Goober asked, "Hey, have you ever read the Aubrey Maturin series?" Just popped in. Sadly, I have not read it yet. I don't actually read a lot of fiction just because I don't really have the time. I try to read fiction like sometimes when I can, but usually when I read fiction, I usually read like it depends. Like the last book I read was what is it called again? Yeah, I actually read the latest one I technically read was The Great Gatsby, and before that I read The Sound and the Fury. Great Gatsby I didn't. I think it's a bit overrated personally. Well, I mean, there's probably a good reason for it being popular, but Sound of the Fury was quite interesting. Caligula said, "My dad is 53 and he doesn't dye his hair. It's still dark brown." I thought you were saying first that he had dyed his hair blonde, which a 53-year-old man dyeing his hair blonde would be actually absolutely hilarious. Tyler said, "Clearly Norway is the worst. They gave us Frozen." Sandra White said, "He's 38." Man, your son is old. I thought, well, like at first you were gonna say like your son is like 2 years or something, 2 years old or something. Well, I'm sure he's a nice. I was about to say nice kid, but like, to me he's a man. But I guess to you he's still a kid. Like to parents, like their kids are always gonna be kids. CB said, "I have the supposed Blackbeard flag tattooed on my left arm. Isn't it true that a lot of the pirate flags are not actual flags?" Yeah, a lot of them a lot of those flags, including the Blackbeard flag. Well, the thing with the Blackbeard flag is there were flags with skeletons stabbing hearts. It was actually one of the most popular designs used by pirates during the 1720s. But the thing with the Blackbeard flag is that it has, the horns on it, which it doesn't. There are no descriptions that I've encountered, or that I know that any historian has encountered of any such flags, or in the period, or even skeletons being depicted with horns. It seems to be a 21st century invention. So basically, an artistic impression. And should I get the tattoo laser removed off? No, I don't think you should do that. I mean, if you like the tattoo, you should keep it. If you think it's a cool design, then you should keep it. And a lot of people, like the design, and it's not about it being historically authentic or not. It's just a design. If you think it's cool, you should use it. But it's if you go around and say like, yeah, this is the flag which Blackbeard used, no, it's just there's no evidence for it. Goofy Goober said, "Very realistic depiction of Nelson's navy, in my opinion." Yeah, I'm not particularly interested actually in like the navy in general. I like the navies in the 16th century because they were organized in such a sort of slapped together makeshift fashion, but afterwards I'm not really interested in the navy, sadly. Pancakes asked, "Do you lift? If you do, what's your shoulder press and bench press?" No, I don't lift at the moment because I just don't have the time. And even then, like I used to like I used to like work out on the regular like last year before I had had an incident where I kind of just became more of a hedonist. And then I mostly did calisthenics, so I mostly did like exercises at home. I do have like a barbell or whatever it's called, and I do have like a pull up bar or whatever, pull up rod. So I mostly did like pull ups and stuff like that. But I don't exercise as much as I used to. Fortunately, I have very, very fast metabolism, so I can eat a lot and I can still stay slim. Caligula said, "Virgin Great Gatsby versus Chad Casanovas, the story of my life." All right then. Pirate flags were red for death, right? No, the black color seems to have been a symbol for death, whereas red symbolized the willingness to neither show mercy, that you wouldn't show mercy, but also that you wouldn't take mercy. So it's like we're gonna kill you or die trying. That was like the meaning of the color red when used on battle flags. Goofy Goober said, "The whole age of sail, in my opinion, gets very boring after the golden age of piracy. Your channel is a great resource. I mean, I think the whole age of sail is quite interesting. I think the sort of mid 18th century isn't particularly interesting because it gets more peaceful, but the late 18th century and the early 19th century are quite interesting because, and I talked about it in the video about the Golden Age timeline. There was this kind of like new golden age of piracy in the early 19th century, late 18th century. That was quite interesting, and I do think the naval war in the American colonies, in the War of 1812 and the American privateers. I think that stuff is interesting. I just don't know about it. And of course, the life of a sailor in Nelson's navy is, and the lives of mariners, and how they structure the ships and everything. I think that is interesting, but I don't really think like the battles themselves or like the engagements and that stuff or the personalities are especially interesting. And I kind of think pirates are more interesting and privateers because and merchants are more interesting because it's kind of people. It's more adventurous, It's people acting more on this sort of free will, adventurous spirit, whereas the navy is like, yeah, we have our orders, so we're gonna do this, And it's, if you like that, it's different. Different people are attracted to like different sort of stuff, different aesthetics. And I'm sort of more into the sort of adventurous frontier type of stuff. Anne Kessler said, "Was there any way to escape pirate life except from death by execution or retiring in the Caribbean in hiding?" Yeah, pirates could get pardons. So the government could offer them a pardon, allowing them to, get an amnesty and do whatever they wanted, and then they could retire or they could join some other legal maritime force, whatever. That was definitely but of course, pardons were, depending on the circumstance, it could be hard to acquire a pardon. Sometimes you could negotiate with the local governor to get a pardon. I actually have a video on pardons planned. I think I actually have the script written, but I don't know when I'm going to actually make the video. But it's definitely something I'm very interested in, pardons. And it's a very complicated topic as well. Michael Robert Embry said, "We believe his, Henry Every's real name is/was Benjamin Longben Barnett." Yeah, I've heard, of course, and I talked about it in the Every video, that his name might have been Benjamin due to the Long Ben nickname. Of course, a lot of sailors, they used aliases and used different names. I haven't heard about the Barnett name, so that sounds quite interesting. Caligula asked, "What are your thoughts on Israel?" We get a lot of avocados imported from Israel. That's all I know. Google account asked, "Are you familiar at all with William Bishop or Peter Easton? Were they pirates or privateers of some sort?" Peter Easton, I know a bit about him. I think he was one of the most, actually during the early 17th century, one of the largest pirates who operated out of England. And the pirates of the early 17th century are super interesting, I think, because they were there's not really anything written about them, but they were incredibly successful and they were huge. Like, most of all, they were large. They were a large force, and they seem to have had some impact on later pirates as well. In that, if you compare them to the Sea Dogs weren't structured in the sort of anarchic manner. They were more they were sort of top-down structure. They had aristocrats like Francis Drake who ruled the ships, sort of like the Navy with an iron fist. And of course, Francis Drake and his associates were sort of the predecessors of the Royal Navy in many ways. Whereas the Peter Easton and those pirates of the early 17th century, they were more organized in this sort of more democratic fashion, like the buccaneers and later pirates would be. But I don't know if they had a very strong link in that sense. Pierce said Hugh Glass was a pirate before becoming a mountain man. That sounds actually quite interesting. I definitely like the mountain men and those trappers, and Hugh Glass has a very interesting story as well. I saw The Revenant a few months back, also a very good movie, and the history is very interesting as well around it. Davina Duckworth said, I think boring and scurvy-free might have been preferable for many of the ship crews. Yeah, definitely. Boring in a lot of cases is definitely preferable. And there is the sort of eternal question of whether you want a boring life or an interesting life. And I answered that question a while back, and I think God gave his answer to me, and he made my wish come true. And sadly, interesting doesn't always mean safe and secure. Pancakes asked, been to the southern US? Ever had home-cooked US food from any region? Ever plan on visiting? I actually had plans on visiting the US back in December and doing some collab with Crew of the Fancy, and also visiting my friend in Florida. But for various reasons, the plans were cancelled. I might visit the US in maybe 25 or 26 in later times. But I'm gonna live in England during the latter half of this year, so England is where my focus is gonna be for now. But I do want to visit the US definitely. Militant Roots asks, do you wish you were a pirate? No, not really. It's fun to talk about the history, but the thing is, like, the purpose of the channel is, like, I often make the comparison of it being sort of historical true crime. It's like it's fun to talk about these people. It's fun to talk about the history, but I don't think anyone should really look up to them. It's they weren't nice people. It is interesting history. That's all about it. So no, I don't really wish I was a pirate. Of course, the 17th century was a very different time period. People thought in a very different way, and violence was much more acceptable. It was a much more acceptable way of resolving conflicts. So there is no, like, I think probably if, like, I've been in I was in the armed forces for 6 years, since 5 or 6 years, I don't remember exactly. So I probably would have been, if I lived in the 17th century, most likely I would have, like, and a lot of I come from a very militant family as well, on both sides of my family. I had on my mother's side, we had I think her uncle, he was in the Latvian Legion of the SS during World War II, and I have I think my grandmother's father or grandfather. Yeah, I think my grandmother's grandfather. I think he was a volunteer in the Finnish Civil War. So I think most likely and they are like legends before that as well. But I think probably if I lived during the 17th century, when violence was much more acceptable, and violence was a legitimate way of living and climbing the social ladder, I probably would have been in some sort of position, like akin to the maritime pirate scene. And there were, of course, a lot of Swedes who were pirates. There were pirates among the Red Seamen in the who were slavers in in West Africa, and Swedes who established pirate colonies essentially in the what then became the 13 colonies in Pennsylvania. So basically, to answer that question, like, I don't I don't wish I was a pirate, but chances are high that if I lived in the 17th century, because I don't think like we should condemn historical people either. We have to like understand that like humans are, as a species, we are incredibly malleable. You can basically we are incredibly shaped by the circumstances. So we kind of need to, I think we need to be humble and look at like what is shaping us today, what is shaping us, what we are today, and what shaped people back then, in the 17th century. Like why were they? Someone said we are adept at adapting. Yeah, partly that, but also like we don't only adapt, but we also we don't really have control over what we become. Um, and if you look at like, I think like what I'm trying to say is that we shouldn't hold ourselves to any high standards, because of course while there are many things we do today which I agree with, and I think there are many good trends we have in society, there are also quite a lot of bad trends, and there are also quite a lot of problems we have which we could have resolved and which we are aware of, but we don't resolve. uh, I think our greed and consumerism is probably our biggest vice and the most deadliest and damaging vice we have, and it's something which always appears throughout history. But I think we are. I think there seems to be a trend of our societies becoming more violent, and I think violence is going to become more acceptable, sadly, in the 21st century. Uh, and you can look at like places like Israel and the Middle East, where violence has become a part of political discourse. Eastern Europe, of course, there's stuff going on there, and also stuff like where I live in Sweden. I have the crime has been rising in Sweden, violent crime, which is way different from how it was like just 30 years ago, and it's happening all over Europe, and also in America. Political discourse um, is growing quite violent in America. A lot of people seem more and more willing to resolve, on all sides of the political spectrum, seem more willing to resolve conflicts by violence. And the thing is also like it's also wrong to a certain degree. I don't want to condemn violence either, because it, on one hand, it has its place. I don't think violence should be the first option. I think you should always aim for negotiation, and uh, violence is a last resort. Yeah, I agree. I think at first you should try to negotiate with people and try to seek common grounds, but um, sometimes violence is inevitable, and we are a violent species, and violence is something which has always followed us. Uh, so it is how it is. So I don't necessarily want to condemn people either, who use violence today to resolve their issues, because they have made the logical conclusion that this is what we want to do, and that's how it is. We have to live with it. We have to respond appropriately. But I've had my own experiences with violence, quite a few, and I'm not afraid of violence, but I much prefer love. Frankly, if I compare my experiences with love and negotiation with my violent experiences, I prefer the loving ones. The loving ones are preferable. Of course, I also prefer. I do in some ways. I prefer violence and direct confrontation over deception and lies and the sort of, yeah, these sort of like people betraying each other, and that sort of like that sort of stuff. Then it's more preferable. As I prefer when people use violence then, or be more direct to resolve issues, rather than lying and deceiving and engaging in these intrigues, courtly intrigues. That was a very long answer to, but it's that time I've been streaming for like 4 hours, so inevitably I'm going to go on these rants. Let's see if we can find some light-hearted questions. Cat Eating Cactus said, there aren't a lot of resources about this, but I know that the standard amount of stern chasers decreased from 4 to 2 over time. Might you know of any instances of ships with more than 4 stern chasers? Those would probably be very big ships, which are kind of outside my field of expertise. Of course, galleys in the Mediterranean often were often built to only have a stern cannon. Oh yeah, you asked about stern, not the bow. More than 4 stern chasers. I only know that galleons and like large ships of the line often had stern chasers, and by galleons I mean like treasure ships. But I haven't, at the top of my mind. I recently saw like there is this very good like see-through image, a painting which an engineer made in like 1690 around that time, and I think that one might have included several stern chasers, more than 4. But I had to look at it again. Google account also I need to shift around because I've been sitting around for too much. Google account asked, thanks for answering all of the questions. Who do you think was the true author of A General History of the Pirates? I think it's pretty much been confirmed at this point that because someone was able to find, I think it was Bayless Brooks or someone that was able to find the original draft, so the handwritten draft of A General History, and there it was signed by Nathaniel Mist, who was a Jacobite polemicist, a former sailor who had traveled in the Caribbean and the New World. That he was the author. But I think it's most likely that he was a publisher. So I think it's most likely that he might have been one of the authors, but that he had several ghostwriters who worked for him. Because, and I've talked about this a lot in, I think, on different streams and videos, but the tone in A General History, it shifts a lot, and the attitudes within it and like the voice, it changes so much between chapters. So I think it's very likely, and I like the theory that it was published by Nathaniel Mist. He wrote bits of it, but that it was ultimately written by several people. Josie said, I always wished more leaders would find duels to solve issues if they had to resort to violence. You have to remember that leaders are representatives of like larger governments, so they are like only the figurehead of like larger interest groups. But it might be healthy if people resolved more of their personal issues between individuals with duels. Don't involve the populace. Yeah, maybe you could have some sort of system where you only have mercenaries who you don't have. I think the problem is more so with conscription and civilians getting hurt. Yeah, I think it would be better at least to only have like conflicts resolved with mercenaries and volunteers, people who actually desire violence. Of course, there is of course, and this isn't politically correct, and I don't necessarily agree with this, but of course, the reason why civilians are often targeted in military campaigns is because they are regarded as an economic resource, and thus they are viewed as a resource of the enemy government. So they are viewed as like being involved in it, and this is of course a tragic part. And I don't think this is, But war itself is complicated. And there are always like many different reasons behind war, and everyone's involvement is different. And I think we can complain about this stuff all we like, but I think we should also focus on how we ourselves as individuals, how we recover ourselves, and here how we take care of our close ones, and also our own personal attitudes towards other people who are involved in these conflicts, maybe even the enemy. And Because I think always you should strive for, even if you are in a war, you should always think, what are we gonna do after the war? Like, how are we going to rebuild bonds? How are we going to interact with our former enemy when the war is over? But that, of course, can be hard to consider when when you are busy trying to survive and defeat the enemy. You know, it's complicated, definitely. N. Gonzo said, also funny enough, but nowadays world is becoming a place with increasing amounts of conflicts, restricted trade, etc., which is sort of the same reasons that made room for pirates in the past. Oh yeah, definitely. Very good point. And there's like, I talked about it a bit before, like you can see these parallels with governments hiding paramilitary groups. And I think, of course, modern paramilitary groups are the best parallel we have to pirates and buccaneers. And as you said, of course, as you said about trade, restricted trade was arguably the biggest reason for the golden age of piracy. The Spanish restricted trade with their colonies, which basically, if anyone desired the goods of the New World, they had to become a pirate. Because, of course, early on, and the Spanish kind of relented on this over time, but they initially, and for a very long while, considered anyone non-Spanish who entered the Americas to be a pirate. You know, but of course they had to relent to it over time because it's ludicrous. Sandra White said the old warrior kings were at least worth following. A lot of them were complete sickos and psychopaths as well, and I think one of the common arguments for why society has gradually become more peaceful is basically that all of these knights and warrior kings, they just died off in battle. They just killed each other, and that kind of gave rise to the more peaceful societies of the 18th and 19th and 20th century to some degree. And of course, I think you can see a difference in war in the 18th, in our more modern era. Wars have kind of shifted to become even more about economical reasons, and it's more about high up interest groups, high interest groups, the interest of high interest groups. Whereas in the old days, it was more about wars were more about private interest groups. So kings and aristocrats and mercenaries and warriors being interested in getting more land and expanding their own social stature, so they themselves take up arms. Whereas nowadays, it's you have some industry, or you have some groups of people who or some government who want war for different reasons, and they just have influence in the government, and the government hires a bunch of teenagers and twinks to go and die for them. That is basically the difference between the people who want war nowadays. They don't fight the wars themselves. That isn't true either. There are, of course, a lot of mercenaries and veterans and soldiers who join wars to fight them, but they don't cause the wars for the most part. It's called fodder. Yeah, exactly. David Mello said, come on, calling the kings of old psychopaths is ridiculous. I mean, psychopaths is maybe not the correct word, but and I'm not sure if I use that word, but what I mean more so is that the sort of kings of old and aristocrats and nobility were more violent people, and were people who were unafraid to use violence and probably enjoyed violence. Which is, how nobility arose. Nobility were originally not elected. They were the strongest, the biggest, the most well-trained people, the most well-armed, who just said, we can protect you guys from the other tribe, or we can extort you guys to give us tribute. And that is how nobility originally arose. It seems to be is the largest and most, I think, logical consensus. And again, that goes on if you want to argue that like violence, you can have different perspectives on violence, but I think I've said my piece here. Loxley said, when France and England had a truce in the 100 Years' War, ex-military longbowmen just became mercenaries, free companies like John Hawkwood. Yeah, definitely a lot of those cases as well. Oh yeah, so Tom de Jong asked the question there. Any history you can share of piracy around the Cape of Good Hope? So far as I know, the Cape of Good Hope was usually only crossed. Like there wasn't a lot of piracy in there because it's quite a dangerous region to sail in. So as far as I know, pirates usually prefer to operate, if they wanted to operate in Africa, they usually operated around the Mozambique coast and around Madagascar, in the Red Sea, and of course in West Africa. That is as far as I know. And I think that also answered your question on piracy, history of piracy in Africa. West African piracy was very prominent in the 1720s. Pancakes asks, do you think another age of mercenaries / pirates will happen again? I think we're already seeing a new age of mercenaries. Mercenaries are becoming very prominent. Mercenaries are, there are a lot of private conflicts and a lot of companies which hire mercenaries to just as protection, but also for different operations. Mercenaries are, of course, incredibly prominent in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So I think we're seeing pretty much and we have a lot of like these PMCs, as they're called, private military companies, and they're basically condottieri or landsknechts, or they're mercenaries. So I think we're seeing a new golden age of mercenaries, and I think there are good videos about this on YouTube which talk about how this might only escalate, and this privatization of violence might grow even further, especially with the growth of companies. The 21st century definitely seems to be the age of large corporations. Of course, I guess you can argue that has always been the case to some degree, at least since the 17th century. But I think mercenaries might play an even bigger part as the 21st century develops. And about pirates, if we see more trade restrictions, as we talked about previously, I think we're going to see a rise in smuggling and black markets and piracy. And you can see this in Russia. And one of Jack in the audience, who is from Russia, he talked about this, about Russians circumventing what is it called? Not the embargoes, the sanctions. Russians circumventing the sanctions. Of course, they don't have piracy or smuggling, but they order through different companies, or they might use Pirate Bay or other sites to acquire Western media and stuff. And I think this has actually even been encouraged to a certain degree by the Russian government. And I think this could we're already seeing it to a certain degree, and it might only increase if we see a breakdown of world trade and international trade for various reasons. But I don't really think space piracy or whatever, it doesn't seem to be it seems to be primarily speculative these days. Sandra White asks, what about King Charles XII? Yeah, very interesting, and he was a bit of a megalomaniac. He's a complicated figure because on one hand, some people argue that he carried on the war for too long, and they said he should have, after he beaten the Russians, he should have sued for peace with them, but the Russians would have come back and they would have been stronger. So he kind of, I think, maybe he didn't realize it. Maybe he was a megalomaniac, or he realized, they are going to come back, and he knew it's now or never. And, he took his shot and marched into Russia, and it failed. And I think that was his interest, like preserving Sweden's standing. And I think, and this isn't like, if you watch the Baltic Empire channel, the older Baltic Empire videos, you probably know that I've held a critical view of some of Sweden's actions during the 17th century. I do not think we should have converted to Protestantism. I do not think we should have entered the 30 Years' War. That was a really bad decision for the Swedish population and also for our genetic makeup, because a lot of people who had resistances to diseases, for example, and who were strong and able were just killed off in war. A huge number of the Swedish population was killed off in the 30 Years' War. Like, our casualties in the 30 Years' War among soldiers are statistically, they are equivalent of what the US suffered in the American Civil War or the Japanese during World War II. So it had a huge impact on our history. Of course, there are some things in the 17th century which Sweden did, which I think were necessary, like the conquest of Scania, which has often been called a genocide, even though if you read books about it, even by Danish historians, it wasn't a genocide. And I think that was like a legitimate legitimate action, the conquest of Scania. And I think Charles XII, I think a lot of what he did was reasonable, but the country definitely suffered, and there were definitely a lot of people who wanted him dead within the country. But also, what I kind of wanted to get into, that a lot of people who were under Swedish dominion, they benefited more from being under Swedish dominion than under Russian dominion. Because the Russians in Sweden, serfdom was abolished. Serfdom was not allowed. Whereas in Russia, serfdom was allowed, and serfdom wasn't abolished in Russia until the 19th century. So in Estonia and the Baltic countries and parts of Finland, it was preferable for a lot of the people living there to be under Swedish dominion rather than under Russian dominion. Of course, a lot of the nobility in those places were also given a lot of autonomy to still have serfs, whereas serfdom was only probably abolished, as far as I know, in Sweden proper. So yeah, Charles XII, a really long answer, but it's quite complicated. But I think he's a very interesting historical figure, of course, and I think he's misunderstood by both sides. You have these like two factions of these people who hate him and you say that he was a megalomaniac, and then you have the people who say that, oh yeah, he was the greatest, he tried to make Sweden great again or whatever. Basically, the sort of more left-leaning people and the more right-leaning people, and I think both arguments have a lot of merit, and I think both extremes are. I don't think it's an appropriate view, or well, it's not. That's wrong to say. People can have whatever view they want, but it's not something I subscribe to myself. Ongunsa said, "I'm a concept artist and I'm doing a personal project about Golden Age of piracy." All right, sounds cool. I hope you show up in the Discord server and share some stuff with you at some point. Nobility, CB said, nobility had way better diets and fatty meat. Yeah, that's definitely true. But definitely they had more access to meat and better proteins, which would have helped. But I think also the diet of a lot of the peasantry is also misunderstood. But that depends on the time period, and the peasantry, of course, were more susceptible to famines, which were, of course, quite a common occurrence in history. Caligula said, "When will you accept Christ?" I'm not really sure what you mean by that, actually. because that can be interpreted in a lot of ways. I don't really think it's my I don't really think it's my choice to say whether God exists or not. It's not really up to me. Sandra White said, I think he was misled, speaking about Charles XII. He preferred being with soldiers than his nation or family. That is often explained as well. He was definitely more a soldier than a ruler, but yeah, he is a very complicated figure because he kind of grew into that lifestyle as well. But he definitely enjoyed the lifestyle as well. It wasn't something, but I do think also that he definitely had ambitions. He had goals with what he wanted to accomplish. I started watching the TV show The Vikings. I suspect it is leading up to the establishment of Christianity in Scandinavia. I watched it like when it came out, but I haven't like watched it since. It wasn't anything for me. I've been streaming for I think like almost 5 hours now. 4 hours and 16 minutes. Apart from the shipwreck, that was kind of a disaster. So I'll probably round off soon. So if you have any more questions, you can drop them in. Yedon asked, if you had to sail a pirate ship in the West Indies, what ship class would you use? I mean, you would kind of use whatever you could get your hands on, basically. But probably the best ship in the West Indies, owing to the geography, one of the safest options is really just to use a sloop or a brigantine. So these small vessels, because the Caribbean it was poorly charted, the geography could often shift depending on water levels. So it was quite easy to get shipwrecked. So having a big ship in the West Indies is quite a risk. So I would probably the best option would probably to have used something like a sloop or a brigantine, which strikes a fine balance between size and firepower and cargo potential and geographical adaptation. And they're also very easy to clean, which is super important. You need to clean your ships from barnacles quite a lot in the Caribbean. Whereas a large ship like a frigate or a full-rigged ship is, it's difficult to sail for one. And they also, since they're usually larger, not all of them were large, but usually larger, it's harder to sail them, easy to get shipwrecked, and harder to clean. Goofy Goober asked, what shipwreck? There was the stream my computer crashed halfway through the stream, and we call that the shipwreck. Sad made a $2 super chat. A bit of loot, matey. Thank you so much for the super chat. That is very kind of you. I'm gonna give you a little heart, and you're gonna get one of these hearts as well. Let's see. Yeah, that kind of looks like a heart, I guess. It looks like a kidney. Well, you get a kidney then, sad. I hope you're not sad. Please be happy. Prisoners in the early US protested against served lobster, and salmon was considered peasant food. Yeah, we have a lot, and also like chicken was a luxury product in the historically, but nowadays, chicken is one of the cheapest meats. Tom de Jong, last question. Which is your favorite pirate in history if you had to pick one? That would be Bartholomew Sharp. He had a very long career. He wrote his own journal, and so we just know a lot about him, his exploits, and also what he was like as a person. And he had a very sort of colorful personality. He was a good navigator. He was a good tactician, but he also had character flaws. Like he would do some really dumb stuff, like he would gamble with his own men, which would really galvanize them towards him. So he could definitely make a lot of enemies. Very interesting, interesting character. Very interesting story. Bartholomew Sharp. Vargold asked, "Will there be a video on the evolution of maps? There were a lot of changes that happened through Middle Ages, Age of Exploration, Golden Age, and subsequent periods. Would be a neat topic, I think." I have no plans on anything like that. It sounds kind of appropriate for Baltic Empire. I have actually some plans on Baltic Empire to cover more sort of technology. That would be really fun, and I have some fun ideas. So maybe something like that could be fun to do. But I definitely am interested in maps, of course. I think early Muslim maps are quite interesting as well, and also early Christian maps like the Sorley map, and also like even earlier like sort of Roman and Viking travel routes are interesting, and how they navigated using landmarks before maps. So sort of just covering maps and navigation could be interesting, definitely. Sicrius asked, "How did you start getting interested into pirate history?" So I've always kind of liked the pirate aesthetic and the sort of frontier aesthetics, like Middle Ages and also cowboys and stuff like that. In 2018, I read A General History of the Pirates, and that is like how I started getting into more hardcore pirate history. And then, of course, it developed from on there. I started reading more books and more period documents and papers and stuff like that. FMK said, "Love this live. Thanks so much. Thank you for attending, and thank you for being a channel member. Also, I greatly appreciate it." Loxley asked, "Was Bellamy a Jacobite, and did he really call his crew Robin Hood's men?" A very interesting question. I don't think there's any evidence of Bellamy being a Jacobite. There is. I talked about this earlier. There are items, or well, one item from his ship that had a Freemason symbol inscribed into it. I think it was a pewter or silver plate. It could have belonged to one of his victims, maybe the previous owner of the ship, or it could have belonged to him. But he, as far as I know, he came from the lower classes, so I don't think he was a I don't think he was a Jacobite. He might have been a Jacobite. It doesn't seem like it. I don't think there's any evidence for it. And regarding him calling his crew Robin Hood's men, that story seems to stem from A General History. So, and I don't think there's any supporting evidence to back it up. So it could be true. That depends on your attitude towards A General History, if you look more positively towards it or more negatively. But I think it should be mentioned. I think the source should be mentioned when discussing this name, so people can make up their own mind. I'm probably gonna stop taking in questions here. Stopping at the heroic age. That's probably the last question I'm going to answer, unless if like there's a really good or interesting question that appears. Of course, all questions are good, but sometimes you get something which is like usually something which I haven't talked about. A really good book to start, indeed. Yeah, I think you should start with General History, just so you kind of know where like you get the where our modern conception of pirates comes from. But of course, if you kind of need to read other stuff as well to know where this book isn't entirely telling the truth, because this book is limited in a lot of regards for different reasons. Some people say that it's deliberately propaganda. Some say it's kind of a consequence of the source materials being unreliable. Others say that there's a lot of embellishments for the sake of selling more copies. And I think it's mostly a combination of the latter two. So I think General History is a good supplementary resource. Pancakes asks, were short-masted ships rare during the late Golden Age? Short-masted meaning no topmasts. Those were especially common. Short-masted ships were especially common for merchants, like floats were usually short-masted, because not having any topmasts means you needed less crewmen to handle them. So, but for pirates preferred taller masts. Vargold asked, last question from me, how are you? I'm quite fine. I hope you're doing fine as well. Herr Forgivebag, did pirates eat gabagool? Gabagool? Not as far as I know. Come on, shut the door! Carmilla, shut the door! Yeah, that's a Sopranos reference for those, unfortunately, who haven't watched The Sopranos. Joseph said, thank you. It was nice to see you. I like your videos very much. It was nice to see you as well. I think you asked a few questions, but I remember that you showed up in the video and made a few comments. I'm glad you enjoyed it, definitely. Militant Roots. No, not Bartholomew Roberts. Bartholomew Sharp. So Bartholomew Sharp. There are actually some theories that Bartholomew Roberts may have taken his first name Bartholomew from Bartholomew Sharp, because his birth name seems to have been John Roberts, and there's another pirate named John. The Heroic Age asks, do you know of other people similar to William Dampier who were researchers and pirates? Yeah, Dampier had, there were actually quite a lot of them. Dampier had some friends like Lionel Wafer, Basil Ringrose. Ringrose, sadly, he died prematurely. He managed to publish, one of his manuscripts got published. But it's really a shame that he died early. And he died actually as a pirate. He died in Mexico fighting the Spanish. Well, he was ambushed by the Spanish. Very, very sad death, because he could have contributed quite a lot, I think. Lionel Wafer, of course, as I mentioned, is very good. And there were, of course, a lot of French pirate researchers. Like I've mentioned Jean-Baptiste Labat. There's also, I forgot his name, a French South Sea pirate, but he was more a pirate than a researcher. But I think Labat is the most prominent one. Goofy Goober asks, can you do a video on the purpose of each sail? I have a video about sails and rigging, which should cover this most satisfactory. So I would recommend that one. Okay, I kind of broke my rule about ending the questions at the Heroic Age. But so I think that will suffice. So I'll have to say, but I'm of course there's going to be more streams, as I said in the very boring introduction. Since I release regular uploads, since I release longer uploads more regularly, that less regularly. Sorry, I'm a bit tired. There's going to be more gaps in the release schedule, so I'm probably going to do more live streams to supplement the releases. But there's actually going to be some surprise releases as well, probably to supplement the income, probably to supplement the video releases as well. And it's going to be a sort of a blast from the past. And so I know a few of you have been asking about it, so maybe you can expect what it is. And of course, you can speculate about it in the Discord or whatever. But we're going to get some new type of content as well. But if you like these longer discussions, if you like long form, you're probably going to enjoy it quite a lot. Militant Roots did a $5 super chat. Thanks for the live. Thank you for the very interesting questions. I like talking about it, so you'll get a heart, of course. All right. Well, I think that's long enough. Thank you everyone for attending the stream. I hope you all enjoyed. It was definitely quite a lot of fun to talk to you guys. And the next video will be out on the 21st, but I might do a stream like before then. But we'll see. Anyway, have a good one, everyone, and I'll see you later.